Prevention-based tools leave you blind to threats inside your network. By adding network traffic analysis to your SOC, you can find and stop attackers before they make their move. ExtraHop provides complete visibility at enterprise scale. Detect threats 95% faster with machine learning that helps Tier 1 analysts perform like seasoned threat hunters. Visit extrahop.com/Security Weekly to learn why the SANS Institute calls ExtraHop fast and amazingly thorough. That's extrahop.com/Security Weekly. By the end of 2020, 99% of exploited vulnerabilities will be publicly disclosed and known to IT system admins. The consequences of that fact means the burglar will already be in your house because you left the front door wide open by failing to patch known vulnerabilities. How can you keep the threat actors out? Through cloud-based automation, Automox enables you to slam the door on unpatched OS and third-party vulnerabilities across your entire Windows, Mac, and Linux infrastructure. Take advantage of a free trial with Automox to not only see the vulnerability status of your infrastructure, but do something about it within minutes. Start automating the fundamentals of cyber hygiene at securityweekly.com/Automox. That's securityweekly.com/Automox. Networks are becoming increasingly complex and fragmented, and digital transformation and DevOps are driving an explosion in network connectivity changes. With each new network connection, cyber attackers may gain another opening to by the end of 2020 the network. /Automox. Pioneered a policy-based approach to network security management using automation and analytics. As a result, you can make entire Windows, Mac, and Linux reliably take advantage of Automox. To learn more about Tufin, the security policy company, go to securityweekly.com/Tufin and sign up for a free evaluation. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Oh, sorry, I can't hit the button on my teleprompter, apparently. Register for our upcoming webcast tomorrow with ServiceNow. It's going to be a lot of fun. securityweekly.com/webcast. If you missed any of them, of course, you can go to securityweekly.com/on-demand, but ServiceNow's webcast is today going to be talking about risk and vulnerabilities and ways to solve that in the real world. It's actually a story in how ServiceNow solved the problem internally, which is pretty cool. The Layer 8 conference, of course, is happening in Providence, and it will be all about social engineering and open source intelligence gathering. Of course, Saturday, June 8th, here in Providence, Rhode Island, they're going to have a mental health hacker village, the tool lockpick village, and a CTF with Trace Labs, as well as some awesome presentations. Layer8conference.com for more. Let's see. This week I am joined, of course, in studio by Mr. Matt Alderman.
Hello.
What's going on?
Hi. Always fun to be in studio.
Yes. Nice to have you here. And we're going to talk about some enterprise news.
Lots of news on cloud
and containers and stuff, and Kubernetes, like our first couple of stories. So ShieldX adds what they call lateral movement prevention to the Elastic Security Platform for AWS.
Yes.
What is the Elastic Security Platform?
Well, it's ShieldX's Elastic Security Platform, I think.
I
think that's what they call their product.
I thought it was an Amazon's Elastic Security.
No. So I did a little bit of research on this one because I was interested in how does this differ from CloudWatch and CloudTrail, which are two services already in AWS.
Sure.
And the difference that I can ascertain from this is, so CloudTrail and CloudWatch help you do a couple things. One, they help monitor for changes in configuration of your infrastructure in AWS. And the other one pulls log data that can be integrated into a SIEM, et cetera. But it doesn't look like it supports a lot of native network traffic monitoring and analysis. There are some network traffic analysis capabilities in a VPC. What ShieldX has done is really now, I don't know exactly how they've done it, but they now allow you to monitor east-west traffic within your VPCs.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which is interesting because you could always monitor kind of north-south traffic. This is now the ability to monitor east-west traffic and do some additional capabilities that doesn't look like AWS has native solutions for.
Yeah.
So this kind of ties
security
in.
vendors are filling all those gaps left by the major cloud providers.
Yes. The interesting part for me will be, does AWS eventually do this themselves? We've seen AWS be pretty aggressive in adding security service offerings to their AWS customers.
And not just the capability to collect traffic, but the analysis
Yes.
Is both what ShieldX is providing and AWS.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so because I was thinking, wait, doesn't CloudWatch or CloudTrail already do this? And they really don't. They're really more logging activities or monitoring for configuration management changes. This is more of a network traffic analysis east-west capability within AWS. And so, yes, filling a gap that currently exists in your cloud infrastructure environment.
And they already support VMware ESXi and Microsoft Azure, which is interesting.
Which I think is where they originally started.
Yeah, I read all of this and I'm like, where's our next move into the cloud for our own software?
Yeah,
I just get really confused as to, not confused, but like there's so many choices, right? I'm like overwhelmed with, well, if I put it here, I get these capabilities, and put it here, and then I get these It's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, and I think
when you're deploying applications into the cloud.
Agreed.
So much stuff.
And I think the advantage here and the value here is that you are going to have hybridized environments. You're going to be running some stuff maybe on-prem, maybe in AWS, maybe Azure. Maybe
Google Cloud, which is really picking up.
Yeah, we've got more announcements in Google Cloud here in a minute. But the important part, I think, for not only security companies, but for enterprises to understand is you will have to pull data potentially from all different sources and be able to bring all that stuff together.
It's kind of like traditional operating systems. You got Mac, Windows, and Linux. And in the cloud, you've got Amazon, Microsoft, and Google.
Exactly.
And I don't think any three of those in each set are going away.
No.
In your environment, you probably have got the three different operating systems. I mean, we definitely do here, right? And enterprises on a lesser scale and probably more on the server side and a lot less Mac OS, I think. But then you go to the cloud side and just looking at all of the various features from the cloud providers and what kind of applications and features and functionality you might be utilizing, whether it's a straight software app that's running serverless or if it's some kind of infrastructure, you're going to probably be in at least 2 out of the 3, probably all 3.
Right. And the cloud providers, although provide a solution for themselves, they're not going to make it easy to hybridize that data with other cloud providers. Right. So even though Amazon's created some great security offerings, they are limited to AWS.
Yes.
And so how do I now, if I want capabilities that are in AWS and Azure, Google Cloud, or on-prem, who are the solutions that can hybridize across all those data, bring all that together in a central view? That's, I think, what ShieldX is trying to do from an east-west traffic analysis perspective here and just expanding into AWS.
Cool.
But this is a gap.
Threat Stack now has cloud security platform features to improve the visibility into Kubernetes environments, which is yet another question. Where do you put your Kubernetes or container management of any kind? I think the standard is Kubernetes, right? And
pretty much.
The cloud providers have. Does Amazon have their own like version of Kubernetes, or you can host Kubernetes in
EKS
Amazon?
is their managed Kubernetes offering,
right?
Which is a variation of ECS, which was their original container service that they had out there. Google has theirs, GKE. Amazon has theirs. I think it's called AKS. And so, again, in a hybridized world, you might be having your own Kubernetes cluster on-prem. You might be leveraging EKS in the cloud for some of your apps, and the ability to manage the Kubernetes security is becoming important. We see a lot of announcements. I think a lot of the container security companies and other application security companies are definitely supporting more of the Kubernetes.
But now in Threat Stack's case, Matt, Threat Stack is the provider?
Yeah, so
you host it in their cloud?
I think of Threat Stack, another one in here. I classify them more as a cloud workload protection platform.
Yes.
So think about managing and protecting the infrastructure, Kubernetes being a component of that. Threat Stack already has offerings to manage security on some of the underlying hosts. This is now moving up the stack to also include Kubernetes into that stack. So I classify them more as a cloud workload protection platform to oversimplify, not to create terms for vendors out there. But that's how I would classify them, as they are looking to protect all the different assets and components of your cloud workload stack, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. This is where that's at. This I don't know if it supports the managed Kubernetes environments, I'm assuming this is if you're rolling your own Kubernetes on infrastructure as a service and on your EC2 instances. My guess is that's where this is really coming into play in the Kubernetes world.
And ThreatStack has AWS infrastructure control plane monitoring.
Yeah.
Which could almost sound like what ShieldX just introduced.
Kind of, but I think, again, it's more at the infrastructure, not at the network layer.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And so Google Cloud, in the news, Tenable has integrated with the Google Cloud Security Command Center. Of course, Google's made a lot of announcements in terms of security associated with their Google Cloud offering, and I think really ramped up their whole cloud presence.
Yeah.
Hopefully their APIs are one of the good ones as we've experienced. So Google's got some awesome APIs, and some of them are easier to work with than others. It was telling Matt earlier, the YouTube APIs plural, are very difficult to work with, and there's multiple versions of the data API, making it very confusing. When I worked with the Google Drive and Docs and Sheets API, there was a couple stumbling blocks, but it was much easier to work with. Hopefully, what they're providing in their cloud security command center, their APIs are in the easier to work with realm, but Google tends to really overcomplicate their APIs.
Well, part of it, I think, is Google's acquired a bunch of companies. So in the case of YouTube, it was an acquisition. It wasn't built by Google, so it probably doesn't have the same team that's building out the other APIs. In Google, so Google Next was, 2 weeks ago? And these are a number of announcements on the heels of Google Next, where security companies now are looking to integrate with Cloud Security Command Center to, again, back to hybridization, right?
Yeah.
I'm using Tenable to scan my internal network. I've got assets up in the cloud. I've got to scan those, bring those together. Integration makes complete sense.
Scan typically in the cloud is usually more like a configuration, authenticated kind of audit, right? Of your
I mean,
settings.
you could run, in the case of Tenable, you could have an SS agent running on the infrastructure to grab the data, integrated into the Google's Cloud Security Command Center.
Gotcha.
That is an interesting set of words together to say.
Cloud SCC.
Yeah.
Even the acronym is hard to pronounce.
Yeah, Security Command Center. But a lot of companies went after AWS first. So Tenable has solutions in AWS. Then everybody kind of moved to Azure. Now it's time. There's enough demand now for Google Cloud. Now you're starting to see everybody starting to integrate with the Google Cloud platform as well. Again, we're going to continue to see these trends because that's where infrastructure is. It's going to be mixed and all over the place.
And the next one is Quest Software, which I hadn't heard in a while, hadn't heard that name in a while. They have a fog-like container management platform that does exactly what we're talking about, allows you to, they say real-time and historical analytics of containers and hosts across physical, virtual, and cloud environments, which seems to be the trend, obviously, as you've already stated, where you're in mixed environments today.
Yeah, and again, this one is actually a little more broad of an announcement. This isn't just the integration into the Google Cloud Security Center, which is the last one. This one is Kubernetes monitoring, Docker Swarm monitoring. Swarm is still out there.
Sure.
There's a lot of organizations that went Docker Swarm, and so there are still Docker Swarm instances out there, even though Kubernetes has the majority and is probably the de facto moving forward. It adds dependency mapping of understanding the dependencies of containers running on different infrastructures, which is really interesting because one of the challenges with containers is where the heck are all of them, right? Where are they? Because you can deploy them so easily. You've got them deployed in different places. Understanding the dependencies of the container to the infrastructure they're running on is a challenge, a visibility challenge. They added container heat map to provide real-time and historical usage resources of the containers, and this container scatter plot, which is interesting to look at clusters of containers across these different metrics. This is the evolution we've been talking about for years.
Yeah.
And what you're seeing now is more and more companies embracing these newer technologies and figuring out how their solutions also adapt into these environments.
I feel like we haven't hit a tipping point yet either. With adoption with cloud and containers.
We're getting closer.
Yeah.
I mean, we are seeing an uptick.
Still feel like there's a lot of legacy applications.
There are.
Still.
There are. And this is a transformation that will continue for years, which is why when I did the InfoSec World session a few weeks back, one of the questions on the panel was, do we ever move to 100% serverless? Is the server dead? Like the statement we used to say, the mainframe's dead. The mainframe obviously is not dead. It's still sitting there. Never died. Right? Never died. And I don't know that servers eventually fully die either. But the way servers will be used and the way those endpoints will be used will be different, I think, over time as more and more of these applications move to containerization. More and more platform container as a service offerings are out there. I continue to see us abstracting the endpoint away. Will the endpoint ever go away 100%? Probably not, because there's always going to be use cases, I think, in certain environments like hospitals and plants and other areas where you will have some infrastructure. So I don't think we ever get to 100% cloud world, but we are continuing to see this evolution, and therefore providers have to support that new environment. What was interesting is when I first saw this, I'm like, wait, Quest is part of Dell, right? No, Dell sold them off back in 2016.
Oh, okay.
So Dell acquired Quest. It was part of the portfolio, and then I think it was
when
after
Dell got
RSA, EMC and RSA, they brought them in, and then Dell spun Quest, SonicWall, and a couple other assets out.
Dell didn't get it acquired. No, they spun SecureWorks in and out of
but
Dell.
They
That's
also,
what it was.
They also spun out.
I gotcha.
Quest was also part
of that.
Part of that. That happened in 2016. That's why I had to go do some research.
That's probably we haven't heard from him and covered him in a while.
Yeah.
Too. Flashpoint has strengthened its intelligence platform with some new dashboards, analytics, and expanded collections and tailored alerting by industry. It's interesting. They can gather intelligence reports and data from illicit forums, marketplaces, chat services, pay sites, technical data, card and account shops, and vulnerabilities, and provide that in a new, sounds like an update to some of their analytics and end user interface.
Yeah, I had to go research Flashpoint because I hadn't looked at them in a while to say, what is, who is Flashpoint? What do they do? They market themselves as a business risk intelligence platform. And what's interesting is it's a combination of cyber threat intelligence, which is what this talks about.
Yep.
It's corporate and physical security, which is interesting because we don't always associate physical security sometimes into the cybersecurity space. I do see some interesting adjacencies there with physical security. We know that the CISOs are taking on more of some of the physical security aspects. They also do fraud and insider threat. So it's a combination of these components that come together in what they call their business risk intelligence platform, which is interesting. I haven't seen anybody kind of put these pieces together in that kind of platform before. Typically, when you think about business risk intelligence platforms, it's kind of some of the messaging that the GRCs would try to do, right, is the overall governance risk intelligence platform. This is a different take on it that includes things like physical security, which is like, ooh, that's interesting, right? I haven't seen that.
We classify a lot of vendors in this realm, and I think the pendulum kind of swings from basically you're just getting information that's available online, right, that you're collecting about the organization. So that's intelligence gathering for your organization, and they're going into the the dark web. They're going into the underground kind of forums and communications and monitoring that, right? The pendulum swings all the way to the other side to companies such as like Expanse, to use them as an example, where they're really just giving you your external footprint. And I think there's a tremendous amount of value in both. And I think there's a lot of vendors in the middle, Digital Shadows, Risk IQ, that do a little bit of both and partner with each other. One of them partners with Flashpoint, I forget which, right, to give you that external view of your organization. I think this is more and more becoming a solidified category, but the choices out there have a lot of differences, in my opinion, in features and functionality.
Agreed. And if you're taking cyber threat intelligence and integrating that data into potential corporate and physical security, think about social media, hijack accounts, et cetera, that could impact corporate or physical security. You integrate that into your fraud platforms to look for very specific cases and uses of fraud. You bring that into insider threat, right? So that correlation piece is, I think, the interesting part. And how do those influence those other offerings?
I was struggling with how it ties in physical security, but it just dawned on me, a story from a long time ago on the show is that on a pen test, someone sat in the parking lot and monitored I believe it was 900 megahertz frequency for communications. And I believe that was on the help desk's wireless headsets, and collected enough intelligence to be able to impersonate an employee and worked there for an entire week, like went to birthday parties for the employees, like the whole thing. But what I think the transition into the digital realm is, if someone's doing that, they may create a new persona. So I create a new LinkedIn profile under a fictitious name. I state that I work. There's nothing preventing me from stating I work at the company, right? That can be an indication of a potential physical threat. The fact that someone says they work here, but we cross-reference that with our HR database and they really don't work here, like that would be an easy thing to automate, right? And flag on and say, well, if you see this person or this name, that's a fictitious person. So,
and we'll cover aspects of that in the Okta Evident announcement, because
that
is about
tracking identity.
That's about verification services, right? So how do you verify these users? Almost the same thing from an employee perspective, right? Because that is a potential fraudulent use case where some of this intelligence would help augment and enhance those capabilities.
Right, because Okta and Evident are all about tracking and verifying people's identity.
Correct.
Right? Single sign-on is Okta, right?
Yep.
Not so much validating the identity. That's more of what you'd use multi-factor for and other things you integrate with Okta, as well as that Evident IO.
This is not Evident IO.
This is a different Evident. See, I was like, Evident IO was bought by Palo Alto like a couple of years ago.
Yeah. So this is where, Evident, if you're watching, call yourself Evident ID, because I did the same thing you did at first. I'm like, wait a minute, Evident IO, they're a cloud configuration platform. They don't do anything with identity. They were bought by Palo Alto, and then Palo Alto also bought Redlock. I'm like, wait a minute. So I had to dig in and go, wait, this is Evident ID. Evident ID is I have their actual website up because they are the identity assurance platform built to bring confidence to every identity and credential verification. So they are an identity verification service. But if you just say Evident, we all think Evident IO instinctively because of that history. So Evident ID and Okta. So it's the verification services of identity linked in with Okta single sign-on, so that when you allow people to use those credentials for single sign-on, you know that they've been verified, so you know that the user's verified. Yes.
Well, that makes sense now. Let's see. RiskSense had, I thought, a really interesting report, and you know how much I love to pick apart people's surveys and find the holes in them and stuff. This one I thought had some pretty interesting stats and information. As it wasn't a survey, they reviewed the CVE data, which is very interesting exercise to do.
Because there's lots of them.
In fact, announcement I forgot to put in here, Polyverse created an open sourced, freely available API to interface with all the CVEs.
Yeah, called CVE API or something like that.
And some of that exists today. You can do that pretty easily yourself, or there's other similar services. Polyverse created this new one.
There are ways to get access to the NVD data pretty easily.
The CVE data alone is pretty easy, and there's a couple of different services, and some of them are in fact free. Not open source, but free with registration. And then, of course, there's several different companies that offer commercial feeds for that pull from not just CVE, but lots of other sources as well. So I thought that was interesting. But RiskSense looked at some CVE data and told us that 2018 was the most weaponized year on record, despite a 31% decrease in vulnerabilities compared to the high reached in 2016. 2018 had 177 weaponized vulnerabilities, which is a 139% increase, which tells me that attackers are weaponizing much more quickly.
Yes.
And you need to patch much more quickly as well.
But the second point,
that sounds easy, but we know it's really not.
That's true. But the second point in here was most exploits are available before a patch is. Yeah. So to the point, you identify a vulnerability, it's being weaponized before the patch is available. So there is still a gap
Yep.
in exploit to patch timing here.
Right.
Yes, patching helps tremendously. And look, we're big fans of patching and the automation of patching, but
the other
some of these
statistics are most breaches happen after a patch is available.
Yes.
Which is why I underscore the patching point, but your point is very valid that there's still a gap that you need to fill with some technology and processes together to make sure that you're protected in that gap time.
So of the 177 weaponized vulnerabilities in 2018, 50 of them were available before the patch.
Right.
So almost a third the exploits were in the wild before the patch was available. So there's still some gaps there.
You can really reduce your risk by not running the software that's vulnerable.
Which is point number 5, by the way.
If you read the report, which you should, I thought they did a nice job with it. They said that Adobe Acrobat is by far the #1 piece of software that has the most vulnerabilities for it. So one thing that I would recommend to reduce your risk is to not run it. But as Matt says, everyone just runs it because it's there, right?
It's there, and everybody uses it as the default reader.
Yep.
It is the most vulnerable product.
I
think it has been for a while, by the way. I don't think this has changed much.
But the alternatives also obviously have their vulnerabilities, largely because it's parsing data that's being fed into the application, right? So, I mean, Adobe didn't write the best code to begin with for this platform, but it's also very difficult software to secure because you're parsing the PDF format, which is a hot mess. And we've seen tons and tons of vulnerabilities, not just with Acrobat, but all of the
even some of the base libraries.
Yeah.
That are creating the PDFs,
Correct.
right? So the vulnerabilities are embedded down in some dependencies as well. But that points to 5. I thought 3 was a little interesting, is that cloud products produce the largest increase in vulnerabilities. Now, we've talked about the migration to the cloud, the adoption of cloud, but with that comes the attacker. Because now they're starting to go after cloud stuff. So cloud products are actually increased. They're increasing in vulnerabilities, which makes sense as we adopt more cloud. They're going to shift, right? As we shift away from certain internal infrastructure and now move to the cloud. That cloud infrastructure is typically publicly available. It's the old remote vulnerability tricks, right? Now they're going after the cloud infrastructure. We're going to see an increase in cloud-based vulnerabilities, which I thought was interesting in here as well. And buffer overflow was still the most common vulnerability, which means we still haven't solved that one.
Piece of analysis.
Yeah, these are great summary points out of this research that, look, I think people can take some actionability out of.
Yeah, that's what I liked about it.
Right?
Actionability, one of the things I would do to fill that gap, I would implement Capsule8. Love their technology. They are not a sponsor of the show, but I will endorse them because I've spent some time with the team and got a demo, and I really like it. And they had an announcement for supporting the Google Cloud Security
Command Center. I have to read it every time. I can't.
Command Center.
Yes.
And they also say Capsule8 is the only company providing high-performance attack protection for Linux production environments, whether containerized, virtualized, or bare metal. They will be one of my choices on the Linux platform to help fill that gap we just talked about of vulnerability is discovered, exploit is created, but the patch isn't available yet. We've seen that certainly with Linux several times, and a lot of zero-day vulnerabilities in Linux over time. A lot of the vulnerabilities that are pointing out that we're discussing on the shows in Linux are in software that has been around for 20 years, right? And sometimes that bug can be traced back into code, it's 10 plus years ago.
It's those dependencies that have been there for a long time that may or may not have been fixed, but they are part of the distribution because of all the dependencies in those libraries. And that's why as we continue to see adoption of containers, understanding what's in the binary, understanding
containers
all
are
the dependencies
Linux,
in there, what vulnerabilities are there. And, this is where somebody like a Polyverse potentially comes in, where you can limit down what's in that distribution, right? That's why we've always liked the Polyverse concept is, okay, I've got this Linux distribution, but if I'm not using certain pieces, can I strip them out so that those vulnerabilities aren't in my custom distribution? That just lowers the attack
And it
footprint.
changes the way the memory works for all of the binaries, the way they're compiled, and puts protections in so that your exploit might work on a Linux Ubuntu system, but if it's Ubuntu and it's using Polyverse's package management system, they've changed and put the protections that are open source and available, but really difficult to configure, and Polyverse has done a great job of putting those together. When I run my exploit on a system with Polyverse's package management, it just doesn't work because the address space is randomized and all of the features that you get across the compilers and such on Linux systems. So.
Yeah. And we're going to continue to see more advancement in these types of solutions because
containers are Linux,
yes.
right?
Yeah, primarily. I mean, there are Windows containers, but the majority of the distribution and usage is definitely on the Linux containers.
Platform. Yep. Awesome. Well, that rounds out the news for today. I think we are airing next a segment with Dave Kennedy from Binary Defense.
Awesome.